Welcome to Craft Politics. I'm Joseph Lavoie.
I'm Andrew Percy.
And today we have a good friend, a former colleague of mine, Andrew MacDougall, on the show. So two Andrews. I guess it's supposed to be better than one, although I might take one over the other. Andrew MacDougall and I served in Prime Minister Harper's PMO. He had what I think is probably one of the most thankless jobs in politics, which is the Director of Communications to a G7 Prime Minister. And we wanted him on the show because he, over the summer, authored a paper for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Andrew argues that the prevailing attention economy, dominated by big tech platforms, is actively eroding the foundations of Western democracy, is killing traditional news media, a topic that has long captured my attention because even when Andrew and I were working together in the Prime Minister's office, we were trying to figure out how to use new technology to directly reach Canadians. So Andrew, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to get into this with you.
Thank you so much for having me on, gents. And I think the full story of me bringing you to the PMO is like I had asked John Baird years before if I could have you in the Prime Minister's office, and he basically told me to fuck off, that I couldn't have Joseph Lavoie. And then I finally succeeded in getting him over. And what did I do? I fucked off to Britain. Yeah, we did the
I
first
think we had
ever,
a lovely 3 or 4 months together in the PMO.
Yeah, we did the first ever. Well, we had done the first ever cabinet shuffle on Twitter, and then that felt like a good use of new technology back when it wasn't a threat and menace to society that it is now. And we're now reaping what we sowed.
Have you tracked the polling for when you left and when Joseph joined? Is that like is there a...
Yeah, well, there
a
probably
couple
is.
years later, we didn't win, so let's put it that way.
No, I'm still accused of fleeing the country and going to Britain because the RCMP were closing in on me for Nigel Wright and Mike Duffy. People listening want a throwback scandal. Yeah, it's just
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
There is an
the
extradition treaty, isn't there? So I don't think
I don't know. I'm a citizen, so I think I'm protected. I'm protected over here.
Right.
They can't ship me back.
Well, I really enjoyed your paper. I found it interesting. As I say, it's a topic that interested me. But you don't pull any punches. Let's get into it. So how do you define the attention economy? And what do you think makes it such a fundamental threat, not just to traditional news outlets, because I think that might feel instinctive to a lot of our audience. You go further. You say it's an existential threat to democracy.
Yeah, and if you think, we're used to talking about physical resources as being precious and overexploited. But I think the most precious resource of all is our attention. What are our lives except what we choose to focus our attention on and give priority to? And I think what we've seen now with the rise of, and it's really just a handful of major platforms, that their entire business model now is how long can I keep you in one place paying attention to a screen? And that is different. If you think back to the days of old, a newspaper wanted your attention, sure, but it couldn't follow you around all day to bid for it. And once you finished with the paper, you put it down and you went on with your day. Or once you finished watching the broadcast or listening to the Today program on the BBC in the morning, you were done. And life would leave you alone. The world would leave you alone. You'd get on with your life and off you'd go. That really started to change when these platforms came up. And when I was still working in politics, they were seen as just another broadcast medium, really, that you could use to go around the mainstream media and go directly to market and directly to your voters. And it's now turned into something horribly different in that these businesses, and this is what I argue in the paper, these businesses, they don't get paid unless we're on their platforms using them. So the incentives for them in this attention economy are to do whatever they can to keep us on the platform. And you won't be surprised to find out that that's not by playing to the better angels of our nature and giving us rich, nutritious, factual information that helps democracy along. No, it keeps it. We're amusing ourselves to death, to pick up the Neil Postman thread, that these platforms encourage us to be, a lesser version of ourselves. I wouldn't say the worst version, but a lesser version of ourselves. And we are kind of at the whim of these platforms. Because they use, if you look at Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, when they did Thinking Fast and Slow, somebody finally put down all of their stuff in one place. And all of these cognitive hacks are used by the platforms in the search to keep us going and to activate our dopamine pathways in our brain to keep us. And that's the addiction pathway, by the way. And why that's a problem for democracy? Well, obviously, you can't do politics and government in that kind of environment, in that kind of soup. For politics, you need good people, you need good information, and you need kind of a common canvas to debate issues on. And right now, everything's atomized. But we're losing good people in politics because the attention economy favors somebody like Donald Trump or Nigel Farage more than it favors somebody like a Stephen Harper when we worked for him, or any of the politicians of old who were mostly elected for what they knew and how they could coalition build and get things done, not for how they could hold your attention. And Donald Trump, and I'll shut up in a second here, and Donald Trump, for all he's the master and has always been the master at consuming people's attention. He just now has a universe where that is the reward and that is what's favored. And that's why he's succeeding.
It's interesting, isn't it, though, the idea of, sorry to jump in, Joseph, but like getting someone's attention is not a bad thing ordinarily. The problem with these platforms is, as you say, it's highly addictive, which is, again, that's a problem because that leads to mental health issues. But it's more like what the attention is being garnered for, right? And a lot of it is misinformation. And that's that's the really dangerous and sinister bit of this, isn't it? It's the attention bit is bad enough because that has this whole addictive element, but it's the misinformation which is then permeating these platforms to which people are addictive and just cannot stop scrolling. And that's a really kind of damaging part of all of this, isn't it? It's just the fact that what you're seeing very often is just noise that's often wrong, factually incorrect, and people aren't interested in making arguments. It's just a promotion of a thought, even if it's factually incorrect.
And I'd even go a bit further, Andrew, in that it's not misinformation, obviously massive problem, but it's just the trivialization of everything, and even non-threatening content. And I use the example in the paper, like I support Chelsea Football Club, and in the old days you could either go to the match, watch it on TV, or read a report in the newspaper the day after, and that was it. You were done for kind of your football content. Now there are 100+ podcasts that you could listen to. You have the rest is football. You have all the non-Chelsea specific but football related. You could literally spend your entire day consuming content about something you care about and like, but isn't really conducive to your productivity, your family well-being, or your work well-being, right? And that's this thing, is that we have combined this environment that we've created with the digital delivery device that follows you wherever you go. And that's a problem, whether it's politics or whether you're a school teacher and you now have to teach in the face of kids having all their messages on their phone, all the games on their phone, all their music on their phone. If you told a teacher, and Andrew, you'll know that, if you told a teacher, here's what we're going to do, we're going to allow all this stuff into your classroom. If you told them that 20 years ago, they would have called you crazy. Like, why would you do that? And similarly with democracy, if you told people 20 years ago, here's what we're going to do, we're going to crater people's mental health, particularly young people, particularly women, girls. We're going to gift the authoritarians of the world open access to our information space, and we're going to gut the business model and accountability function that the traditional news media has provided. And we're going to do all of those things so a handful, and it is a handful, of major platforms can make a fuck ton of money advertising to us shit we do not need. That's the trade we've made as a society, and and nobody wanted it to be that way. But that's where we are. And you doing serious politics in the face of that. Like, this world is not made for Keir Starmer. I don't think any world is made for Keir Starmer. He's terrible. But he is like boring. He is beige in a world of technicolor, right? And the analogy is like the news is a vegetable and content is the dessert table. And good luck getting anyone to eat the vegetable when there's all this dessert around. You're not going to do it. As any parent can tell you, you're not going to win that battle at the buffet line. And as a Democrat, you're not going to win that battle as long as we let these platforms kind of blend us all up together and service this content.
It's such a challenge. I mean, I feel if we go back in time to when we work in the PMO, and if we had to work with the tools that are available now, it would be very difficult because, to your point, let's be honest, PM Harper was not the most exciting personality for the type of media environment that we find ourselves in. And, whether it's media, traditional or new, there's just this constant desire to try and capture the next viral moment. And as a professional communicator, someone who designs campaigns for so many of our clients, I just find it so tough, increasingly difficult to create information that is one part factually correct, and then on the other part that has the resonance required for it to perform well on these algorithms. And increasingly, the two can't go hand in hand. You have to overly lean into the emotive narrative to have any chance the stuff you produce is going to generate clicks. And it's incredibly frustrating because on one side of I speak out of both sides of my mouth. I want us to have more civilized debate. This podcast is an effort for us to do that, to make politics a bit more approachable, make it a little bit more entertaining and less serious, but also while talking about serious issues. But I also want the podcast to perform well, or I want our clients' content to perform well. And the two seem to be in such direct conflict, and it's difficult. And And I think it's contributing to this factor that we have of increasingly polarized environments, because those viral moments, in order for them to be viral, need to be visceral, and they need to lean into someone's pre-existing worldviews. It is just such a difficult information environment out there, isn't it?
It is. I look back, Joseph, and it's not that long since we were kind of frontline in politics, but fuck me, does it ever feel like a different galaxy? And you could see it happening. I knew my life was over in my job when I had to respond to something dumb that one of our MPs tweeted. And you're like, I have to answer for all of that kind of offhand commentary as well. You're like, it is. And I think, to make a more serious point about government, I think, and like Carney's struggling, like, although not in the polls yet, but he's not really getting anything done. Starmer's just a train wreck. Like, it's hard to govern in an environment that you're being programmed to and at 24/7, and not just from serious contributions, but from all this ephemera. And I think government is de facto impossible, and you have to be tactical and responding tactically. And there's no time for strategy, no time to think about it. And we've just, it turns out giving everyone a voice and giving them a microphone and turning the dial up on debate to Spinal Tap levels just makes everything a mess. And it's the thing you don't say in politics, but you meet enough people, and the first thing you learn is they don't know anything about anything. And that's not to slight them. They're too busy living their lives. They don't have time to adjudicate what the proper criminal justice legislation is, or if this budget provision is enough. They're worried about closer things to them. Can I put food on the table? Do I have a job? Am I safe? Right? And then you now have this social media environment where we are asked to do all the filtering and adjudication of the information we're seeing. And we used to have an industry called journalism that would do that for you. They would find the signal in the noise, and they didn't do it perfectly. They missed stories, ignored voices, didn't challenge corporate power, cosseted it sometimes. But by and large, there was a function there that we could pick up a product once or twice a day and have a very literate and accurate, if not comprehensive, view of something that happened. And we're now freestyling. Like, it's madness.
Yeah. And you knew those, kind of legacy newspapers, whatever they were, had a political bias, but you knew there was a limit to that political bias. You knew you were getting an argument, a political argument and a bias, but you weren't getting something that was, factually incorrect or indefensible or just based on, as you say, kind of emotions. But the problem is now that the problem's now doubled, though, isn't it? Because you have these platforms doing this, but then you have newspapers, of which there are still a lot in the UK, also chasing the same thing now. So I think, like, so many of the newspaper headlines, even the BBC does this, like the stuff they put out on their push notifications, the way their particular headlines, which, bear very little relationship to actually what's often in the content of the story, or what's not in the story is as telling as what's in it. Everyone's kind of going in the same direction. So even the bits of the media we look to be responsible is becoming increasingly irresponsible as it just chases after this same kind of, need for attention.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you make the vegetable compete against the dessert, right?
Yeah.
Like, the news has never had to do that before, right? They had to compete against other news. They didn't have to compete against your time for your movies because you only went on a Tuesday night when it was cheap, or on the weekend when you were having a date. There was discrete kind of windows for stuff. And these platforms put everything in one place, check one, and then two, don't distribute it based on utility. They base, as Joseph was saying, on the kind of emotional or trigger that you get. And this is a conversation you would never have in PR 20 years ago. You would talk to a reporter and they'd be like, oh, that won't play online. We can't do that. That won't get clicks. And reporters now will say, I was asked to pitch an essay for a Canadian paper this weekend, and I wanted to do something on this subject. And the answer was like, well, that doesn't really ever play well with the audience. And for a newsroom to say that won't get, like, is it a story or not? Is it important or not? It's not. And look, you always had to sell papers. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, the headline always screamed from the paper to get somebody to pick up the paper. But now, to Andrew's point, it's every story has to do that. And the BBC push notification has to compete not just against Sky News push notification. It has to compete against, what Donald Trump is saying in another country. It has to compete against what celebrity said something, or what footballer said something, or, Kim Kardashian decided to do this. Like that. And you go to local media, if you're a local paper in Kelowna or Doncaster, your audience was those places. And your editor didn't think, how can I compete with Donald Trump? He didn't have to compete with Donald Trump. There might be some wire copy on page 7 of the foreign news section, but what led was what was relevant to your community. Now that communities live online, You have to compete for what's drawing the most attention. And that's not how are the local roads, schools, courts, all that stuff, the kind of accountability journalism that used to be paid for by advertising. The ad money now goes to what people are willing to click on. And guess what? That's a different test. As Andrew was saying, it's a test we're failing.
I want to come back to some of the solutions that you have, Andrew, in the paper, but something that you both just talked about just sort of jogged a thought in my mind, which was, I remember when I got active in politics young, I was deeply motivated by the sense that the traditional media environment was so biased against people that held my views. And it felt so satisfying to find online blogs and other sources that shared my perspective. And I sometimes wonder, is it possible that traditional media inadvertently, in a desire to at least try and present always a balanced, curated way, to fail to represent some of those voices? And so this concept that the media is always biased, it made it such that no one trusted, well, it's not no one, but a lot of communities no longer trusted them. And so when you have access to an algorithm that's putting front forward for you the arguments, the worldview that you have, you start to feel validated that those views exist. And so naturally you're going to want to consume more of it. So I sometimes wonder how much of this is a failure on traditional media's part to have ever dealt with the attack that they weren't entirely bias free. So something for us to talk about. But I was driven by that because I wanted access to more free speech. And you, Andrew, as I understand it in the paper, you're not against free speech, period.
Of course not.
You had this line, I think it was rather catchy: free speech, not free reach. Can you walk us through that concept?
Yeah, and that's not mine. I'll put my hand up that. So there's a couple people that have used that expression, including a Facebook engineer who wrote a great opinion piece in the New York Times about how to fix that. And yeah, I think so. Free speech, I think everybody can and should support in a Western society. But I think what we've kind of based ourselves on for the last long time is that more speech means better speech. And I think these platforms are really testing that proposition in a way that hasn't been tested before, because a lot of people talk a lot of rubbish, and so that doesn't scale. And as ever, I think that's if you want a framework of why things don't work, the scale and pace of these platforms is unlike any communication environment we've had in modern history. And so what these platforms do is take that nugget of speech and can give it a reach far beyond what a traditional paper would have. So first, to get in the old school newspaper, you would have to have a credential, some sort of cogent argument. You'd have to convince an editor that, look, I know what I'm talking about. Here's what I think about this. And then they would lend you their reach. Contrast that to now, where you don't have to talk to anyone. You can say whatever you want. And then if the algorithm finds that you're getting an instant response to that. So we're now trading on derivatives of information. So it's not what did I say? It's how did people feel about what I say? And that's mostly how the algorithm then takes a decision to take what you're saying and spread it to what could be millions of people. And that's the trigger, I think. I'm all for people saying whatever they want. But the second, and just like an old school publisher took a decision, I will lend my platform to your voice, you assumed a liability in the publishing world of, if I publish something that then gets somebody, I'm liable for that. Whereas the platforms just blender it up, send it out there, and then absolve themselves of the duty. They just wipe their hands and go, largely because of legislation that was passed in the 1990s in the States, Section 230D, which was meant to protect the then nascent internet. Now they blast these things around. And I think that's got to be the trigger point. Platforms should encourage people to express themselves and say what they want. But the second the platforms take a decision to boost that content, they should be liable. And they go, oh, I can't do that. We couldn't do that. That in itself is a form of speech, but it's not run by any human process. Like, there's no accountability in the system. And you could easily have a social media environment where you couldn't retweet stuff, you couldn't like stuff, you couldn't give the algorithm these hooks to then make a decision about where do I share this. And you wouldn't be impinging on anybody's speech, but you would be limiting the reach that these platforms give. And I think that alone would change a lot of the dynamic. We now know we respond, and to your point earlier, we say punchy things because we get the little dopamine reward of what people thought about us. And we all do this, right?
Yeah.
We all write that tweet and we go, oh, that was clever. Let's watch how this one does, And we're like that as human beings, right? We all look for validation in whatever form we can get. And these buttons, like buttons and retweets, are validation. And I know, like, I've just written something about Mark Carney that will appear tomorrow. I could give that a headline on social media that would make that thing sing a lot more than, to Andrew's point, what the copy actually says. And you can A/B test this to your heart's content. Welcome to the joys of these platforms. And we all know, if, like, I write, Mark Carney's the worst prime minister ever, here's why, it'll do better than, a more reasoned take about Carney, trying to run a government like he ran the bank, which he just can't do. People go,
Yeah.
And we all know that, right? Or I think this politician did a reasonable thing. Like, and that can be a valid news story, like government solves problem. That doesn't sing online.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that with free speech, obviously we're all supporters of free speech, but free speech isn't free speech if it's promoting something that's just an untruth. And this is the thing I realized probably in my 24 years in elected office. The difference from the beginning to the end was at the beginning when I used to talk to people as the elected official who had the possession of facts. Now, at that point, I was a city councillor. So when I talked about city council issues, I generally found most people would go, oh, well, okay, I've informed them. I remember right at the end as I was leaving and I was campaigning the last in 2024 general election, not for myself, obviously, I wasn't standing, but I was talking to this lady on the doorstep and it was about the migrant issue. And she told me as a fact she'd seen online that, the UK gets more migrants than any country in Europe. And I did the whole, look, completely agree the migrant issue has got out of control, but I have to say it's not true. And she said, no, I've seen it online, it is true. And I said, look, I'm telling you as your member of parliament, this absolutely is not true. And she said, well, that's my opinion, we'll just have to disagree. So I kind of and she moved on to something else. And I sort of I had to go back to her. I said, look, I'm sorry, I really have to come back to this thing about your opinion. Like the opinion you have, it's not an opinion if you're factually incorrect. She went, no, she said, that's just my opinion. You've got your opinion. And she said, I've seen lots of this online. And I said, look, I can prove to you demonstrably. And I just thought, and this was an older lady as well. I just thought, this is how does democracy survive this? And somebody, when you as the person who can absolutely tell them 100% the fact, and somebody says, well, no, but that's my opinion and I've seen it anyway elsewhere. I had no response to this lady other than just repeatedly saying to her, but that's not true. And if she just said, well, I believe it is true, it was more like, by the end, it was just, well, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
And, and I'm entitled to my view on this. And it's like, well, you aren't entitled to a view that's incorrect. That doesn't mean you're a defender of free speech or anything like that. It just means you're promoting an ignorant, ill-informed lie. And there's nothing free or, a fair exchange of views there, is there?
And that's a problem that takes a hell of a lot more effort to clean up than it does to spread. And, you could do a deep persuasion or conversation. Okay, well, why do you think that? But what have you seen? What was the source? Okay, what do you know about that source? Let's have a look at that. And there are techniques to do that, to meet people halfway, to kind of not take them on head on, because then it reinforces their opinion. But that's a huge investment of time versus some clickbait merchant just saying, I'm going to say this outrageous thing and watch it go around the world. And this is where, again, the platforms are not agnostic. They tip the balance. So, you could read a book like Comment, Subscribe by Mark Bergen of Bloomberg, who wrote about YouTube. And there was a stat in there that Alex Jones gets 70% of his views, InfoWars, from the Google recommendation algorithm. Like, that's a choice for you to put that in front of people. So when the companies are doing their part to weaponize this spread of nonsense, you could not imagine a newspaper making that decision for the editorial function it has to have. And still, however it gets misapplied, it still has to be applied, versus these platforms that have nothing. And it's just what are people willing to watch. And as long as people are willing to watch, the platforms are willing to serve more of it. And to answer your question, there's no way around that, Andrew, I don't think, until you shift the onus and make these platforms a fee for a service, because they will treat us a lot better as customers than they ever will as a product. And that's what we are. We get sold to their audience of advertisers, and their incentive is to do whatever it takes to keep us on the platform so they can sell us. If I gave $10 a month to Facebook, they would have to treat me as a customer and go, how do I give this person the best version of this platform that I can give them? Not just what shit can I serve them that will keep them there for as long as possible. It's a very different brief. And why have we let these businesses, who are the richest, some of the richest and most powerful businesses, like Google makes over $100 billion a year advertising to us. That Meta makes a similar 80-something billion a year advertising. Why have we let them not charge us, sell us, and then give society this dog shit in return? Why have we would not allow, and I write in the paper that you imagine a tobacco industry where they didn't charge you for the cigarette, but they just gave you smokes as you walked into the mall and said, don't worry about paying for the smokes, just go buy something at the shop and I'll get a cut of that and we're square. Like, we would never allow that harm. We would never allow it. We wouldn't allow it for booze. And yet here we are letting these platforms just do this. Make us pay. Like, we'll find out that we don't actually need these.
We'll take it.
just the interesting thing here, though, is if you look at polling, these tech companies are mistrusted. So, on the one hand, you have this massive mistrust of them, so there's a separate argument here about whether they're also bad for capitalism. Right? As a capitalist, should you be supporting this? Because they're bad for democracy, but they're potentially bad for capitalism because of this abusive position they're in because of their size. But that's for another day, perhaps. But they're not trusted by the public if you look at polling. And if you remember, Joseph, we did some polling in the business on this, didn't we? So the big tech companies are not trusted, but at the same time, the stuff that's coming from their algorithms and all the stuff that's being pumped out to people is being trusted, is being repeated verbatim and as fact by the public. I kind of don't understand those two things can be held together by the public.
Yeah, and I think that's where the addiction bit gets into it. And I use that word advisedly. I'm not throwing we shouldn't blame ourselves for how we behave on these things, because we are being targeted and we are being, the amount of UX and UI research that goes into these platforms, the intermittent variable reward is the brain's favorite candy. If you give us a predictable stimulus every 30 seconds, we tune it out. If we don't know what we're going to get every time we open the phone, we get excited. It's like the same thing as a slot machine, the exact same thing. These are mini digital casinos that we have in our pockets. But not only that, they don't even need real money. You can use fake money to make them work. And that, I think we have to be kind to ourselves in saying, just like a drug addict probably doesn't like the fact that they're a drug addict, they just need the drug. I think there's an element of that. And again, as long as we don't have to pay anything, we won't force that conversation with ourselves. Read a great book, sticks with you forever. See a great film, you'll remember it for the rest of your life. See a funny TikTok video that's one of the 1,000 that you looked at that day and one of the thousands you look at per month, you'll never remember any of it. But the platforms don't care. They get paid either way. They get paid more if you watch more. So the incentive, we have to change that.
Now, a lot of listeners, Andrew, will go, okay, yeah, on sides. There's been a lot of literature on this in the last couple of years. Okay, smart ass. What solutions do you have? What do you suggest we do? You have a bunch in your paper, all very interesting policy ideas. One of them is an engagement-based tax. I think this is, to me, it was a novel concept. Do you want to walk us through what an engagement-based tax would be and what that would look like?
Yeah. So, as these policy papers are, they're kind of a give and take between me, the author, and the think tank. And I was looking at how can we mandate a price for these platforms, and what is historically in public policy, like that is a heavy-handed tactic for a government to kind of come in and just say, you shall pay for this. And you have obviously alcohol taxes and stuff like that. But when you don't have a price point to start with, you can't tax to regulate. If the platforms are free, I cannot stick a tax on that other than going after the tax on the revenue at the end. And the platforms are so good at shifting that profit everywhere. It just wasn't going to be feasible to do it. So then we started looking at, well, what's the harm, right? It is the addictive product features that are designed there and the encouragement the platforms have to keep us on the platform for a long time. And you also want to get at the fact that not all engagement online is bad. If I take 30 minutes to watch a YouTube video that is a documentary that was produced by the BBC or whoever, that's a good, quote unquote, accurate piece of content, I shouldn't be punished for that necessarily. So we came up with an engagement-based tax as a way of frequency of interaction with the screen. And then also, if you could even then weight it for the younger the user, the stiffer the penalty, because we don't want our kids doing these things. And so if you think in that environment, a YouTube where I'm watching 2 30-minute videos in a day, if you taxed based on my engagement using the platform, would be 2 hits. If I did 1,000 TikTok videos in that time, and obviously one is more damaging than the other in my view, and that's the kind of short form content that just mindlessly keeps us consuming or doom scrolling, and I think that as a thought exercise, if you actually had to have a meter and track how much engagement you were doing, like we all have the how much you used your phone thing, and it scares the fucking shit out of me when I see it, right? Yeah. But some of that is Spotify listening to podcasts or listening to an album. It's not mindless use of digital. But if I'm sitting there tweeting and refreshing my Twitter feed and looking at TikTok videos or going through my Instagram reels, that's a different kind of engagement. So we wanted to find a lever that could get at that. And could you bring one in? It would be tricky, but imagine if we just had to do that as a thought exercise, or if we could get an app on the phone that would show us what our cost would be for using our phones in that way. It would incentivize us surely to think about, is that how I want to be spending my time and money? And right now we don't have that conversation because it's all free. and it doesn't cost me anything to other than my attention and other things I could be doing in my life. And, Sunday Times had a piece this weekend that looked at usage of phones amongst kids, and it's even worse than it was. It's, on average, or almost 50% are on there for about 6 hours a day, with 10% being up to 9 hours a day. Just step back 20 years and tell parents, in the future, your kids are going to spend 9 hours doing something, anything. You would want to know what that thing is, how that came to be, what, and not only that, what are they doing on that platform? You would ask a lot of questions, and yet we largely don't. And I think that was the thinking of how can you design attacks that would show people viscerally what their time and attention is costing them, and then making a decision of, is that a good use of my time or my attention? And maybe I should take my nose out of my phone and do a podcast with some charming blokes.
Well, good luck finding one. Just as an aside, one of the things I really enjoy scrolling at the moment on Instagram are these. Have you seen these AI videos of 80s kids saying, hey, it's the 80s calling? Like, what are you guys doing? Like, is it true you all sit on your phone? Do you remember like when we used to ride bikes and be outside? And I except I'm on a phone scrolling, looking for more of them. But they're really quite, it's I watch them and it makes me really nostalgic for like my childhood, thinking, God, we used to go out and do all this stuff, outside all day on bikes, doing this stuff, playing block, whatever, kick alley. Instead now you're kind of like, kids are literally just sitting there on these screens. But, for all the, we all know this is terrible, but, to continue the solutions thing, is it about bans for under 16s? Because how do you kind of enforce all of that? Is it more stuff around the online harms bill, the Online Harms Act, which in the UK is obviously one of the things that Farage, I think, was in Washington railing against? But, which of these solutions are the ones politicians are going to find palatable?
Yeah, and I think so. I discussed these in the paper, but I think prohibiting kids from using, there's precedent for that. We don't let them buy smokes. We don't let them buy drinks officially. Obviously, still, any kid with a bit of noose can get that stuff, but it's hard, right? We don't encourage that. We don't let people drive. We don't let them serve it in the armed forces. And I think there's enough data now on mental health to show, and kids themselves will tell you this, right? I quote another study in the paper where a professor in a New York university asked his incoming class, if you could get rid of social media, would you do it as long as everyone had to do it? And the response is 80% people, yes. Now, the kids are telling us they don't want this stuff, right? But it's a collective action problem, and those are the trickiest problems to solve. So I think it's, and if you look at the one good thing the Online Harms Bill does is the age verification, mostly for adult content, but the tech companies can do this. Like OnlyFans does do this for their, and I'll put my hand up, we work for OnlyFans. I should declare that, but you can age verify using AI, a great tool called Yoti. You can do these things. And these, more to the point with Meta and some of the other platforms, if you look at the discovery material from some of the legal cases proceeding against them, several of the states' attorney generals in the U.S. are going after them. And you can see in internal discussions, Frances Haugen's book, Sarah Wynne Williams' book, they know exactly what they're doing, and they're targeting these kids. And officially, you can't get on these platforms unless you're 13, but they know, because they reference this, that they have people as young as 6, 7, 8 on these platforms, and they do nothing to try to verify their age. Nothing. That's a low threshold thing you can do. Actually verify their age. Even if you had to register the parent's payment information, you would at least prompt a conversation about these things. And the irony of all ironies, of course, is your childhood is the one time you don't have to worry about finding your mates and where they are. They're all in class with you. They're in a building with you day after day. You're there in person. There's nothing better than that. When you get a bit older, move to a new city, technology can be great for putting you in contact with people with like-minded interests. You can do all that when you're older. But to make a more serious point, your brain's not fully formed until you're in your mid-20s. Your prefrontal cortex is the bit of your brain that goes, wait, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. So when we ask kids, what were you thinking? They're not. The brain's not there. It's not there to go, this is a dumb idea. I shouldn't do that. You only get that when you're older. And there's nothing wrong with protecting kids from those decisions. And then you get into all the stuff like, if you watch the documentary called Can't Look Away, which is based on Bloomberg journalism, Snapchat is nothing but a drug delivery device for kids. Sextortion happening there on platforms like Instagram. We used to panic as parents about the pervert at the school gate in the trench coat flashing people, right? Those people all live on Instagram now, right? That's where they live. And if you look at John Haidt and people like that, we massively overprotect our kids in the real world and tell them that the real world's a fearful place. And we let them go wild. take 9 hours a day on your phone. What could go wrong? You're in your bedroom on your phone. Well, a lot can go wrong. We should be protecting. And I have 2 girls, 9 and 6. They're not going to get a smartphone. No way. And I'm prepared to be the most hated parent. But most parents you talk to. And we have a phone-free school movement here in the borough of Lewisham where I live in London. And the schools are going to prohibit the open carrying of smartphones in the schoolyard. And I think these are things we can do. And if our kids complain, well, we're the parents. We're the ones that are supposed to show them. But then again, you get into the addiction problem. I look at my phone more than I should. And I tell myself it's for work or for noble purposes. But now when I get home and the girls are here, the phone goes somewhere else. And clients and colleagues know if they need me, they have to call me. So I hear my phone. And my commitment is to be present with them. Because what in the world is more important? And we pick up phones now on average 150 times a day, often for no reason other than we're conditioned to do
reflex.
it. And it's not that's addiction.
Constantly.
It's, and we're like, we need, if you just unplug the internet for a month, like you would get sanity back in your politics. You would get rational discussion back. You would people would stop freaking out about every little culture war and we'd all calm down a lot. And people like Donald Trump and Nigel Farage would lose a lot of their superpowers. And, so we got to do these. We got to try to have these conversations and not the conversation back to the Online Harms Act, trying to figure out how to clean up the mess that these platforms make after the fact. Adjudicating speech, what's okay, what's not okay, is a much harder task than stopping the machine from spraying this stuff out. Focus on the business model is my argument, and you do the things I argue in the paper. I think you will get less content and less time online, and we'll be able to have that space back again to have these conversations in a rational and reasonable place, or at least a more reasonable one.
If I could close this, start to close this out, Andrew. As I mentioned at the top, I'm just torn on this because I have been such a tech optimist, and technology has always fascinated me. I built my entire career around figuring out how to use technology to communicate, and I maybe always put more of a rose-colored lens on these things than I should. And, you talk about in your paper the threat that autocracies present to us, right? Their ability to use this information technology to really reshape public opinion in very difficult and very harmful ways. And I look back at, one of the biggest projects we did when I was at Foreign Affairs that our government supported was when
Digital
we shut down.
diplomacy.
Yeah, when we shut down our embassy in Iran, we were like, well, let's figure out how to do digital diplomacy. Work with the University of Toronto, developed this amazing program, Digital Public Square, and we were able to use this technology to get people who otherwise have no ability to have free speech and civic engagement on their presidential election. We gave them a space to do that, a safe space online for them to do that. And I always come back to those moments. I'm like, there is a way to use tech for good. And so I guess it's always about finding the right balance, isn't it?
Yeah, technology is neutral. It's what we do with it that matters. And I think that just gets back to my point, Joseph, about the incentives right now. Right now in an attention economy, the incentives for these platforms, these big, powerful, rich platforms, is to design ever more features that can keep us on the screens longer than and look, that's not just a theory. Look at what Instagram did once TikTok took off. Instagram before TikTok was nothing like it is now. Didn't prioritize short form video. It had no Reels function. It was just a place for pretty pictures to look at. The second TikTok came and started taking eyeballs away, which meant taking money away because you don't pay a subscription.
Right.
Now, in a world where I have my Instagram subscription and my TikTok subscription, the platforms they have their money. So they don't really care how much time I split between the two. Just like if I have 8 magazine subscriptions, they don't care how often I read, how much of it I read, as long as I keep the subscription, right? But now, if I'm on TikTok for 4 hours a day, that means I'm not on Instagram and they're not getting paid. So they have to make Instagram more like TikTok. And the competition becomes who can hoover up attention, who can provide a better service that's more conducive to Western democracy. That incentive will not change until we get them out of this business model where we're the thing they sell, consequence-free, at scale. And you cannot have a new entrant come into this market because these platforms have all achieved network effects. You've had your Blue Skies, you have Macdonald, you have these other things, but they never take off because, there's only room for a few of these places.
The same way.
Yeah, you can't compete with free and
Yeah.
build millions of users. You just, but if in another policy paper, not to open this can of worms at the end, but something called adversarial interoperability, which is something Cory Doctorow, Canadian technologist, bangs on a lot about. It's like when you have a mobile phone. When you switch providers, you don't lose all your contacts. You don't lose, everything ports over. You're just paying a different provider for the service, right? You could do that. with these social media platforms. So your contacts and friends and content can be accessed by anyone, whatever platform they're on. But the platforms won't do that because they won't get paid for it. But if they were a fee for service, they would have to give a better service that doesn't rely on addiction. But you could do stuff like that. So there are things we can do. And technology, to your point, is good. And there are uses for it. It was the Arab Spring. It was a time of belief. But as ever, if you don't put the right framework and boundary around that, and like as a conservative, I don't like heavy-handed regulation, but I think we've proven that the Wild West of doing nothing about these platforms is not great. And then more to the point, so much of what ails the world now is powered by what's happening in the United States. And if you were to come at these platforms with a united front around the table, you could probably hem Donald Trump in a lot more effectively than you could by doing anything else. And his superpower is having these platforms to bully people and to set an agenda and to denigrate the media and to gut the accountability function of the press. And hopefully the West will wake up to the fact that I joke, and this is maybe a poor way to close, but like what the Israelis did with Tehran, can we do that to Silicon Valley, please? Little tactical nuclear strike. And that would be the best thing you could do for Western democracy. And I say it kind of in jest, but not. Like these platforms have just been allowed to run wild, and we got to put the harness back on them. And that's not anti-free market. That is just like, to Andrew's point, but people will lose faith in capitalism if we let this very pernicious form of capitalism advance. And people say it's not about competition. You know what outcompetes a healthy cell in the human body? A cancerous one. It's not to say like it grows much faster. Do we want it growing much faster? No, it's cancer. We have to be able to spot this stuff and cut it out.
Well, this is all very interesting, Andrew, but I got a shit ton of notifications that are just driving me up the wall here. So I'm getting a little antsy. I'm going to have to bring this thing to a close. I've gone 45 minutes.
There's always somewhere else to be. No.
This has been amazing. Really appreciate your perspective. Appreciate you coming on the show, walking us through the paper. We'll post some links in the show note to the paper for anyone who's interested. And we'll have to have you back at some point to talk Canadian and UK politics.
Yeah, no. And thank you so much. It's a grim subject sometimes. I often I'm the guy that shakes fist at cloud in my office. I'm the old man who gets angry about technology, but I'm slowly convincing people, and thank you. Every conversation helps kind of try to at least plant some seeds in people's minds about, are we doing the right thing? And so thank you for lending me your platform to give my voice a bit more reach.
No problem. All right. Percy, are you trying to say something yet? Old man on mute there. Speaking of old men.
Oh, sorry. I did it because I was being kind because I don't understand technology and there's some noise outside. So I was trying to be kind. I said, but we will be putting it on TikTok and we will be putting it on Instagram.
Yeah,
and
correct. We're putting our hands up. We are the hypocrites.
We're all whores to the algorithm. This is just life.
It's just about
But this is
we
true.
have self-awareness.
Okay, we'll be back in your feeds, everyone, on Tuesday with an issue scan.
Thanks very much.